contributors, one of whom you have heard from this morning. Maha is with us again, I hope, online. Maha?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, great,
Thanks
okay. We've also got Joe Wilson, worked widely in the education sector for a very long time and is a co-founder of Open Scotland. Kenji Lam, working for Colleges Development Network, and Beck Pitt, from Milton Keynes, works on the OEPS project and also a lot on OER stuff back at Milton Keynes at the Open University. We've only got 25 minutes. I've got some, possibly up there in a minute, some key questions I'm supposed to ask, but I'm going to, they've just been comforted, so I'm just going to discomfort the panel slightly to begin with by asking the question they perhaps aren't expecting, which is there anything burning or bugging you at this moment that we just haven't raised or hasn't been raised widely enough or just hasn't been recognized? And if I start with people in the room, but Maha, here's a warning, the things that we haven't apparently heard loudly enough yet. You can repeat things, but perhaps they need repeating even more loudly. Joe, you look like you're ready to go.
I'll have a go first. I think we're still in an echo chamber. As I walk around this room, I meet lots of people I've met in this space, probably now for the last 10 years or more, and that was before we had Creative Commons and Open Education or MOOCs, people who always want to collaborate and share around learning materials. And you're all here, and we're all really still having, while the terminology has moved on, we're still stuck in this the same silo. And I think the challenge around this is, although there's lots of good content come out of this and lots of great thinking, I'm not sure we've moved that far forward, and it's not anything to do with the success or otherwise of OEPS. If you think when this project started, we had Joram. There was a, for all its technical faults, there was attempts to have a place to share and have open learning materials, and one of the arguments was that would be replaced by institutional content sharing portals the same way as we've got open research or other tools. There's still nothing there. Also still, and again, disappointingly, there's no government presence here. I mean, I think the recommendation in the report is absolutely spot on, and I would see this anyway, but adopting the Open Scotland Declaration is certainly one of the ways ahead, but we were seeing that 4 years ago. And we haven't got proper engagement from the government. So having a funded project was really good, and the recommendations are excellent. But we need now to all go and contact people within the administration and get them to have a real look at this, because our education system is unique, and I think universities do want to share, colleges want to share, and schools want to share, and Education Scotland probably wants to share too. But to break down all of the barriers, you do need a policy lead, and that's very clear. And we're on my way to the OER conference congress in Ljubljana at the end of the month. So UNESCO are going to tell the world that that's what we should be doing, but they've told the world that that's what we should be doing already, and we haven't listened. So we need to get our policymakers to listen. And actually, it's also that end bit. It's not just about universities. This has got to be about colleges and community learning and schools and all these other bits, and overcoming all of the barriers. So we have a proper sharing economy in Scotland. If we're going to have free higher education in Scotland, then we all have to do something to justify that, and that's going back and looking at learning as a common good and sharing stuff. And institutions alone, or back to this echo chamber, all you good people in the room, aren't sufficient to make that happen. We need to get universities and colleges and institutions, GLAM as well, galleries, libraries, art galleries, museums. We need everybody on board, and we need to push this forward. And we can do a lot for learners in Scotland. We can do a lot for learners globally if we get our act together. It's quite sad that some of the events I've been going to over the last 5 years, I see, and no aspersions at all, but I see great places. Slovenia is moving ahead of us. Other European countries are now moving at a faster rate than Scotland is. And we pride ourselves on our education system and the impact it's had around the world. And I think it's time that we really started moving here. So that's the bit that's missing. Was that the kind of thing
discomforting enough? Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Joe. Great. Okay. Kenji.
Yes, sharing.
If you make sharing a policy move, will it actually change anything? If you mandate that everything that we produce needs to be shared, will that in itself change anything? I'm not sure. I'm looking for the breakthrough events that drive change in the sector. So is it something similar to when everyone started sharing music online and sharing it illegally, and then just because the process of that movement happened, that businesses had to come up with a separate model for making their music accessible out there? So I'm waiting for something like that. And I've seen examples like textbooks that cost too much. The Bibliotech JISC backed project that's happened where you pay £6.99 to have free access to a collection of ebooks that you can study through your university courses. That's interesting. What's that going to lead to? Projects that haven't really done as well in the past, but promised something good. CoLeg within colleges, which was an idea where colleges worked together, produced teaching materials, shared them with each other. And because they were all attached to this sort of separate unit that wasn't one particular college, nobody minded using a bit of Glasgow Clyde's materials or North Highland College's materials. It just was this sort of anonymous CoLeg group. And that worked out well, but somehow over time it became slightly more closed and difficult to get hold of the material, and it kind of just drifted away. The thing that interests me most at the moment is potentially a financial driver. So there are 3 colleges now in Scotland who have taken the brave step of dropping their CLA license. Dundee and Angus, for one, for over a year now, have dropped their CLA license. So as a matter of necessary need, they have to educate their staff to say, we have to make more use of open materials. We have to think about producing materials that can be shared amongst our community, simply because they have this pressing need to comply now that they've dropped their copyright license. So yes, I'm waiting for that next big thing, but I'm just wondering what it might be.
Okay, next big thing, still awaiting the catastrophic kind of Napster moment. It's only 10 years, give it a chance. Beck.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Joe was saying actually about the echo chamber, because I think, and I've seen this recently, particularly I'm involved in a project called UK Open Textbooks, and we're going out to conferences and talking to people about open textbooks. And basically open is kind of happening whether people put that label on it or not. You can go out and there's people doing innovative, fascinating things in public spaces, and I'm really excited about the potential of open, but not necessarily using the language that we would use to kind of talk about it. So I think that it's, yeah, there's things afoot, even if we're maybe not engaging with them necessarily as a community.
Great. Okay, Maha.
All right. I haven't been able to follow everything because I've been teaching and on the road and parenting. So I don't know if this is something that you haven't talked about, and maybe it's something you've whispered about. And being the foreigner, you'll forgive me for the discomfort that's going to come from me saying this. So what Joe brought up about why is this an echo chamber? Why isn't it expanding beyond what it is? I'm wondering what this has in common with Trexit. And Trexit is the term we use for Trump and Brexit. The discomfort that we all have and the frustration that we all have, as well, I assume most intellectuals and academics have with those results. And I think as an educational technology type of person, for years, I've always been thinking differently than the common faculty member that I work with and the common teacher. And sometimes the problem isn't that they're not understanding, the problem is the way I'm communicating and the way I'm assuming what will be useful for them and how it will benefit them. And this might be one of the issues, and I face this in my institution all the time with open, is that what I think is useful about open and beneficial, and especially because the discourses are usually coming from the West and they're different from what would be beneficial to us, I need to sort of think about what will the benefit be to them, and then think with them on how they could. And that might be a different version of open than what I think was going to be useful. So I think it's a matter of also listening and not just broadcasting what we think is going to be a good way forward.
Maha, thank you very much. I'm going to immediately ignore you and talk to the group here and yourself about what some of the benefits really are going to be. I'm not obviously ignoring you. I think we're obviously bearing in mind the fact that perhaps listening to our users and the communities that might benefit from this, understanding what those benefits are probably absolutely critical. And I think I should, even though I'm co-director and chairing this afternoon, point out that we can beat up OOPS for not fully delivering what UNESCO has also fundamentally failed to deliver, but we shouldn't beat ourselves up too badly over that. And I'd strongly recommend anybody interested in contributing to UNESCO's policy over the next 2 or 3 years that there's been, and I think still is, an active survey looking at these 5 or 6 really big issues that are holding the movement back, and strongly urging the community to step forwards with working practices which suggest new ways of moving forwards. I think it's a brilliant survey, a really clearly identified series of blocks that are causing the movement not to reach that Napster moment, but it's going to happen. It is going to happen. So without, genuinely without ignoring what Mahal just said in terms of listening to our users, while we do have a panel of experts on the panel, I wanted to talk about maybe digging a little bit deeper about, behind the rhetoric and all the usual statements, what do we really think the benefits of being open are, beyond liberal statements about, you know, it's like air and water, of course we should do it. Are there strong reasons which people just aren't hearing yet?
Yeah, but the bit that I think people haven't latched on to, and if I use that bit about co-creation or what learners think about learning materials and all of that, there is a big focus, and I'll talk about college sector, there's a big focus on the quality of learning and teaching. And I think a whole lot more transparency and sharing around learning materials and having that dialogue with learners, not just in your institution. If you think about the Scottish system where learners are doing effectively the same core of, say, HNCs and HNDs all around the country, really there should be lots of eyes on learning materials and lots of polishing of what are basic things. So I'm not talking about there's always going to be space for published materials and for some of the open books and some of the bigger chunks of learning that are coming down the pipeline. But if things were more open, you would have a higher standard of learning material or learning interaction. Let's not even call it learning material. Let's call it small chunks of learning, multiple choice, you know, all these different kinds of assessment. All of that would come out of greater collaboration and sharing. You know, for a very long time, what's going on in a classroom has actually even been to college managers quite a closed thing that went on in a classroom, and providing the outputs were all right and that you got a good enough retention or achievement or whatever, then you didn't look too closely at the real learning experience and the learning materials that were being used here. This is a real opportunity to ramp all of this up, both for the learners in the classroom, and again, if I think about FE, and we look at the Audit Scotland report that came out last month, and all of these people we know that aren't getting further education, if we tipped some of this out, it would help the broader Scottish society too. So FE's got a role to play in that sharing out beyond the institution as well as universities.
I think the COLEG materials I referred to previously were interesting because they weren't materials that were the OER, the basic materials that the students would work through. It wasn't a workbook. It was a set of guidelines for lecturers to show how they could deliver the content of their subjects, essentially page by page. And that was no bad thing in a sector where you could hire a lecturer literally off the street with no real educational training, and potentially for the first 2 years of their career. And those books were like, they were the comfort blankets for many people. They were a nice security blanket. You could turn to page and see ideas in there that were captured. I think there's a lot of potential for that, for changing, because otherwise, really, why would I adopt more open learning materials or more open practices? What's really, if I was Joe Average, signed up to as a college lecturer, started on my first day, why would I have to? If I have a good understanding of my subject area, I can produce the materials, I can satisfy the requirements of my course, why do I need to? sure, it's a nice idea, it's altruistic, it would benefit everyone, but ultimately in the short term, how will it benefit me? I'm not sure that I have, until you have a clear, easily understood idea of how it benefits me, I'm not sure that change will come anytime soon.
Well, can I just come back to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
So I think at the moment, and I remember the teaching packs, which were big A4 folders.
Yes, they were.
So lecturers are already encouraged to share, but they're just sharing inside the institution. And now they're probably not sharing into that big A4 lever arch folder. They're now sharing into the Moodle, the environment. So they're having to share, but for the learners in that institution. And I think it's just a tiny wee step to switch the button at the back of that Moodle and open up a lot of these learning materials to other learners and to other lecturers across Scotland. I don't think it's such a huge jump now.
It's interesting. I was at Dundee and Angus last week, and they said as a matter of course, one of the first steps they've taken is to allow every lecturer or academic staff member on their Moodle to access everyone else's course. And that was a big sea change in terms of seeing other people's work. But there was a lot of resistance to that initially.
Okay.
Can I just?
Yes, I was going to come to you, Mahar. Go on.
Well, better that I jump in before you single me out. I was going to respond to Kenji's point with something. I taught in an institution where, not now, but at Rice University in the US, where all the teachers were encouraged to put all their material in one space and on a server, and everybody used everybody else's. And I was thinking about something. There's the part of how can it benefit me going on, but there's also the part of believing that what I have to offer is also beneficial to others. And I think having that interplay is really helpful with open, that it's reciprocal. Believing that you have something to contribute and at the same time benefit from others. Because I think, of course, there are people who are uncomfortable sharing their own thing. And there are people uncomfortable taking someone else's because they feel they don't need it. But when it's very clear that there's a reciprocity going on, that maybe, like you say, you're teaching something that you've never taught before, or it's a subject where diversity of opinion is going to help, or there's really well-produced material by someone else. And I think for me, the more reciprocal open is, the more valuable it is for people like myself. And that might not work for other people, but that's one of the things. So that I don't think the question is always going to be, how's it going to benefit me? But rather, what is my role on this table? How am I going to participate?
Mahar, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question about that. And beyond having an attitude of reciprocity in approaching the problem, are there good examples, or do we have any good examples of participatory design in OER that you know about, or processes that support that, or channels that support that particularly well?
What I'm going to say is probably not going to be applicable outside of this particular example. I don't work with OERs a lot, but I can talk about virtually connecting. Some people have seen this earlier today. So virtually connecting originated because I can't travel very often because I have a young child, and it's very expensive and it's very complicated and logistically, and obviously happening right now. And it originated because I wanted to be part of conversations that were happening at conferences, and even more the hallway conversations rather than listening to just what people wanted. And the person who was helping me do this the first time, Rebecca Hogue, was on site at a conference. And the thing is, it wasn't, originally I thought it was a generous thing that she was doing for me, that I was the only one who was benefiting from it. But actually, she was benefiting from being able to sit with people who were keynote speakers and bring them to me. And when we invited other people to join us, they each came up with their own ideas of how to make this work better. And just Sheila McNeil last week at LC was our on-site person, and she talked about how the virtually connecting conversations were benefiting her as well. So it's one of those things that originated to help certain people who were marginalized in a certain way because they couldn't attend academic conferences, they didn't have that privilege, but it ended up also benefiting the person who seems to be the giver in that sense on site. So I think with that one, because the people who were benefiting from it were the people designing it and participating in it, and no one has to do it unless they want to, the group of people who are working on it are benefiting from it. I don't work on OER, so I don't have a lot of examples to give on that. I do know that in certain projects that happen in Africa, and I can't remember the name of the institution, something with a C, that the unparticipatory plans were disasters because they didn't really understand what people wanted. The participatory plans were less productive. But whatever came out of them was more useful because the process itself was useful enough so that people could then decide what they wanted to do afterwards, rather than take something, don't know what to do with it, and not know how to do something better.
Great. Thank you very much. We've got Beck here, and Beck's worked a lot on the OER Hub, which surveys internationally projects, and presumably some of those do involve, there are examples of participatory design processes and projects that have been successful or not successful.
Yeah, there's some great examples of where people have got together and co-created kind of content, particularly in one example is BC Campus and the work that they're doing with open textbooks. So those guys, they basically were reusing as much material as existing OER as possible to create a suite of open textbooks, but they didn't have anything that was suitable to create a geography open textbook. So they got a group of educators together, and over the course of 4 days, they kind of worked and created a new textbook for that particular purpose. There's some great examples of students as well creating kind of being involved in processes like that, and some of the kind of case studies that were developed for OEPS work as well. For example, at Stirling, Greg Singh uses Wikibooks and gets students to kind of create content for that. So yeah, there's some really innovative and kind of interesting examples out there. I think it's interesting just to pick up on the reciprocity discussion as well, because that kind of ties back to what we were talking and what was coming up earlier in discussions about vulnerability as well. And kind of, so there's a kind of, by sharing, you're kind of opening yourself up for comment and feedback, or your work for comment and feedback. And, you know, that's a kind of, that may or may not, Maha kind of mentioned this earlier, be as easy for some people as it is for others. But there is this kind of vulnerability around that you're opening yourself up to feedback and criticism. So it's interesting to kind of feed that into how, you know, hearing about uses of material that's been shared. I think there's actually a need to kind of share back more about what happens and what people do with some of the materials that they reuse. I mean, it's a particular problem, a particular issue for OER impact research is that quite often you just don't know what people are doing with the stuff that's shared. And you know, that's the kind of challenge that I think is important going forward to address. So the more you can share what you do with stuff, the better, really, and share it.
Okay, thanks. We've only got a few minutes, and I wanted to, I think something perhaps we've underplayed about the project this morning and perhaps not said much about, just want to just briefly say one of the opportunities that this project has given, I think, the OER world is there are lots and lots of repositories around. Merlot, OEC Global, just use a Google search on OER. You will find content everywhere and anywhere. I think one of the things, and I take no responsibility for this, one of the things the project really tried to do is not just leave some more projects, but leave some more training materials about how to build projects and a working and open platform in which you could add your own projects. So Merlot, you can add your own projects if you know how to make them in the first place and you know what an open project is. But there are very few training materials on Merlot that help you develop the skills in the first place and gain any credit for that. And I think one of the things this project did rather well was not just to build yet another repository, but to build something which has content in it and adds tools to help others build those. So we'd strongly recommend, if you're not engaged yet fully in production, there are tools and support mechanisms there. And maybe that's one of the keys and one of the things that UNESCO should be looking at, is making sure that those tools for building are there in the first place, not just yet more materials. I'm not certain that that's the moment ever actually diversified music production or engaged more people in music production in the first place. It just changed the business model fundamentally. Okay, I think we've only got a couple more minutes and in fact, we've only got 40 more seconds. Anybody want to jump in with a last plea to change the world? I would say, please go to that UNESCO, and we can presumably distribute somebody on Twitter the link to that. Please do go to that and feed into that survey. It's critically important for the future. Any last words? Because we've only got probably a minute at the most, too.
Well, I think you said it all. Look out for the stuff coming out of Ljubljana at the end of this month. Other countries are going to sign up for this. I'd like to see Scotland at the forefront.
Maha, any last pleading? It's not that we're going to lose you this afternoon, I hope, but during this session, anything else you want to say?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
following the Twitter. It's interesting.
Twitter seems to have livened up in the last 20 minutes quite a lot, so I've achieved my KPI. Okay, I think that's probably enough for now, but thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, Maha, at a distance, and thank you for your patience with us. Thank you. Thanks to the panel.
Thank you.
Okay, without there being actually much of a break, there is no formal break